You woke before the sun, as always, before the birds even remembered how to sing. The chill here doesn't wait for permission. It settles in overnight, seeps into the stones, into the fibers of your poncho, into your bones. You sleep wrapped in wool, curled up next to your cousin's elbow, shoulder pressed against the packed clay wall of the hut. No windows, just a hole for smoke to escape. And even that likes to let the cold back in. But now you're up, teeth unbrushed, belly empty, rope in your hand. You're a bridge keeper, or rather, you're learning to be one. Your uncle, the real master, is behind you, muttering about tension and dampness and weak knots. He's got a piece of coca leaf tucked into his cheek. It makes him sound like he's chewing his own tongue. The bridge stretches ahead, 30 paces long, maybe more, dangling across a ravine where the world drops away. The first few steps are always the worst, not because of the height. You're used to the height. You've been walking these rope bridges since you could crawl. It's the slickness. The way the dew from the clouds turns braided grass into something soft and treacherous, like walking on a wet snake. You kneel, pressing the side of your face to the ropes, fingers moving along the fibers. Your job is simple. Feel for looseness, tug at the tension, smell the mildew, tighten the cords where needed, report the wear to the uncle with the permanent frown. You're the eyes and hands of the bridge, a bridge that sighs and groans more than it sings. It's not glamorous work. Nobody sings ballads about the kid who knots fiber cords before sunrise. But the whole village depends on you. Mothers carry grain across this thing. Messengers run full speed with news from the capital. Priests walk it barefoot, as a kind of prayer. If a cord snaps, they fall. If you miss a fray, someone dies. So yeah, no pressure. You breathe through your teeth and shift your weight slowly, rope pressing into your soles. Beneath you, nothing. Just fog and the sound of rushing water. Far below, your little brother once dropped a stone to see how long it would take to hit the river. He counted all the way to 30. You told him to stop doing that. You both kept doing it anyway. You adjust the side railing, not a real railing, just more rope, waist high, and tie a short loop around it. A safety loop, your uncle calls it, more like a suggestion. You loop it around your waist and hope the gods aren't feeling playful today. You feel a frayed patch, third plank from the middle. You call out, your uncle grunts. He throws you a new coil of grass cord. You tie it in. Your fingers work by memory. Over, under, twist, pull, knot, seal. The rhythm of it is familiar, like weaving or breathing. The sun is barely cresting the ridge now. The clouds start to light up with gold. The condor floats overhead, silent and slow, like it's late for something, but not in a rush. You watch it for a second, then get back to work. You make it to the other side, before the village starts to stir. Smoke curls out of chimneys. Dogs bark. Somewhere a woman yells at a chicken. You sit on the edge of the path, rope dust on your hands, calves aching. You survived the bridge. You deserve a reward, right? Maybe a mouthful of roasted corn, maybe a nap in the sun. But your uncle is already pointing toward the next stretch of trail. Another bridge, another check, another loop of rope tied around your waist. Because in this life, there's no such thing as done. There is only the next knot, the next step, the next person you keep from falling. His knees creak, his ankles crack, but his stride is still long, almost too long for someone so old. Even now, with a cane carved from lightning-blasted wood and a blanket tied around his shoulders like a faded cape, he moves with a memory of speed. He was a chasqui, a runner, one of the thousands trained by the Inca to carry messages, news, and small packages across the empire, on foot. always on foot. No horses, no wheels, just lungs, legs, and lean muscle, wrapped in sweat and sunburn. You sit across from him on a warm rock near the field's edge, chewing coca leaves to stay awake. It's your day off, if you can call it that. You've already hauled water, fed the guinea pigs, and helped your aunt mash purple potatoes into paste, but now you're allowed to sit. And when your grandfather sits, he tells stories. He always starts the same way, eyes narrowing like he's seeing something very far away. From Cusco to Quito, he says, tapping his knee. 6 days if your legs were good. 4 if the gods were kind. 3 if you didn't stop to piss. He never stops chewing. His cheeks always look full. You're not sure if it's the coca, or if he's secretly storing old words in there, waiting to spit them out when the time feels right. He tells you how the Chasqui stations were spaced every few miles along the royal roads, small stone huts with a shaded ledge, a water gourd, and sometimes a roasted tuber if you were lucky. The idea was simple. Run as fast as you can, hand off the message to the next runner and rest until it was your turn again. But your grandfather didn't always follow the rules. Too slow, he says, spitting into the grass. Waiting for the next boy? Bah. I ran through 5 stations once. 1 breath. No break. Just kept going. You raise an eyebrow. You've heard this one before. Every version gets longer. Why? You ask. Because you're supposed to. Because that's the rhythm of the story. He leans in close, voice dropping low, as if the corn stalks are spies. They told me it was just a message, he says, eyes glinting, tied into the quipu. You know the knots, but I felt the weight, not just the string. Weight, like carrying a secret, like something could break if I didn't get there in time. You ask what the message said. He never tells you. Didn't Stet look, he says every time. Wasn't Stet my job to know, only to run? You want to believe he wasn't curious, but that's the kind of man he was. Built for duty, lean as a blade. You've seen the old scars on his feet, where the road split skin. He used to wrap them in alpaca hide and smile when they bled. He says the hardest part wasn't the running, it was the altitude. You breathe too fast, he warns. You drown in your own lungs. So he chewed coca. Always coca, a sacred plant. It didn't make you high. It made you light, like your bones stopped pulling downward, like the mountain gave you permission to pass. He says he ran through hail once, through ash another time, through fog so thick the sky disappeared. He talks about watching lightning strike the road ahead, and how he waited 1 breath, then ran through the smoke. But his favorite memory, the one he saves for special moments, is the hummingbird. He was near Vilcabamba, on a narrow trail where the jungle tries to swallow the stones. It was humid, loud, bugs the size of fingers, sweat running like rain. He stopped just 1 breath to drink from a carved stone basin left by an ancestor. And then he saw it, a hummingbird, hovering right above his head, bright green, with a red throat and wings that made no sound. It stayed, he says. Did sit move, not afraid. He swears it looked him in the eye, swears it followed him for 3 bends in the path. I knew then, he says, that the message was safe. You don't ask what that means. You never do, because that's not how his stories work. Instead, you watch him untie a small bundle from his belt. He still wears a runner's pouch, even now, even though there's nothing in it but herbs and memory. He pulls out an old quipu string, faded, frayed, no longer readable. He hands it to you like a relic. This one, he says softly, was the last. You run your fingers along the knots, each one tied with precision, some big, some small, some spaced so close they feel like whispers, others so far apart they ache with silence. He doesn't say what it recorded, but you hold it anyway, gently, like maybe it remembers something the world has forgotten. Later that night, he'll fall asleep beside the fire, arms crossed, still chewing, and you'll lie awake beside him, staring at the quipu by the hearth, trying to imagine what it meant to run across mountains, with only thread, wind, and silence as your companions. Not a roar, not a scream, just a deep, slow sound, like the mountain exhaling after holding its breath too long, a rumble that began in the spine of the earth and ended in your bones. You were grinding maize by the stone hut, palms raw, sleeves rolled up, your thoughts drifting toward the smell of stew, and then the sound came, shaking the earth just enough to make your bowl jump, spilling yellow flour across the dirt. You ran to the cliffside with the others. No one spoke. You didn't need to. Down the valley, where the hanging trail curved along the cliff face like a snake clinging to stone, there was only white dust. Not snow, but pulverized rock, settling like a pale fog over the gorge. The rope bridge was gone. The trail carved into the mountainside was gone. The travelers caught between them, also gone. No shouting, no frantic rescue attempts, just stillness. The kind that follows when nature reminds you that it is older, stronger, and not particularly sentimental. That night, the council gathered, not the official one in Cusco, but the real one, the elders, the weavers, the quiet men who watched clouds for omens. They sat in a circle, under a ceiling of woven branches, chewing coca leaves and staring into the fire. You weren't invited, but you listened from the shadows, your breath held behind a hanging reed mat. There was no debate, no arguments, just slow nods and the quiet thump of a gourd being passed. "We will rebuild," someone said. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. That path was not just a trail. It was the artery connecting your village to trade, to messengers, to food from lower elevations, to medicine, to salt. Without it, your people would starve slowly, quietly, without drama, just hunger, like a fog creeping in and never leaving. And so it began. At first light, you packed your tools, a bone needle, a length of twisted fiber, a worn bronze chisel wrapped in leather. You didn't eat breakfast. Your stomach was already churning. You weren't a trained rope weaver, but when a path dies, the entire village learns how to mourn with their hands. The climb was brutal. Every step up the slope felt steeper than you remembered. The sun hit your back like a punishment. The air was too thin to breathe, but too thick to cry through. You carried poles, bundles of grass fiber, and strips of woven hemp. Others carried torches, not for light, but for ritual, because fire keeps spirits away from new paths. When you reached the site, it was worse than you thought. The cliff face was jagged, raw, and completely stripped of its ledges. Chunks of the old trail jutted out like broken teeth. The other side, where the rope bridge had once been anchored, was unreachable now, buried beneath tons of rubble. Still, no one hesitated. A new anchor was chosen, a stubborn knot of stone farther up the ridge. It meant the bridge would have to start higher, the angle steeper, the strain greater, but there were no better options. You could complain about nature, but nature wouldn't listen. Work began before the sun touched its peak. First, the ropes, long thick braids made from grass fibers twisted by hand, soaked in stream water, and pounded flat with stones. You joined the others in rhythm. Twist, pull, braid, twist over and over. For hours, the rhythm became your heartbeat. The grass left blisters on your palms, but no one stopped. You chewed more coca. You drank river water that tasted like iron. You wiped sweat with your elbow, and kept braiding. When the ropes were ready, came the terrifying part: crossing. The first person to step out was the weaver, always the weaver. He carried no tools, only a small pouch of sacred ashes and a sliver of obsidian tied around his neck. He crossed using two thinner ropes stretched between the cliffs, temporary, unsteady, meant only for building. No one breathed while he moved. The wind tried to take him, but he bent with it, not resisting, just flowing. When he reached the far side, he bowed to the cliff and pressed his forehead to the stone. Then he began anchoring the ropes. His hands moved like they weren't his own, like the wind and the stone were guiding them. One by one, others followed, you included. You tied yourself to a line with a loop of fiber that felt thinner than your courage. You stepped out, barefoot, toes gripping the rope like they were claws. The world fell away on either side. You could see the river far below, silent, distant, uncaring. Each step was a prayer, not to live, just to balance. You reached the far side and collapsed, legs trembling, arms numb. Someone handed you a warm stone to hold, not because it helped, but because it was tradition. And tradition is what keeps fear from growing teeth. The new bridge was finished by moonrise 3 days later. It wasn't pretty. The ropes were uneven. The decking was patchy, but it held. You crossed it again at dawn, this time with a basket of herbs for a healer on the other side. The wind pushed you. The sun blinded you, but you made it. That night, you sat by the fire, chewing roots and rubbing your sore hands. Your grandfather leaned over and said, "Now you have walked in the footsteps of the Apus, the mountain spirits." You didn't sit believe him, exactly, but you didn't set disbelieve either. Because when you close your eyes, you can still feel the sway of the rope beneath your feet and the weight of a village depending on a thread. You were just looking for your uncle's missing goat, a stubborn thing with one good eye and a talent for squeezing through terraces. It had wandered off again after sunrise, leaving behind only a single tuft of wool snagged on the edge of a thorn bush. So you followed the usual path down 2 stone steps past the drying herbs along the slope behind the cornfields, where the walls of earth and rock rise like broken puzzle pieces. And then the ground changed. A soft spot, too soft. The grass wasn't growing quite right there. You pressed your foot down and the earth sighed beneath it, not like soil, but like something hollow. You dropped to your knees, brushed away the weeds, and saw it. A mouth. A low, cracked opening between collapsed terrace stones, just wide enough for a body to crawl through. Not freshly dug. Not new. This place had been waiting. The air smelled wrong. Not rotten. Not even musty. Just old. Too old. Like it remembered something you didn't. You didn't go in. No one ever does. Not because it's forbidden, though maybe it should be, but because even the bravest people in the village know that not all darkness is empty. Some of it breathes back. You fetched your uncle. He squinted at the cave, nodded once, and said nothing. No orders, no rope, no torch, just silence. You both stood there, side by side, listening to nothing. But it wasn't quite nothing, was it? There was a hum beneath the silence, a pressure in the back of your teeth, like a memory that didn't belong to you. Your uncle spit into the grass and walked away. That was the end of it. Except, you couldn't forget it. Every time you passed that part of the field, your eyes would shift toward the stones, and the stones would always be just slightly different. One shifted, one darker than before, one pressed down by something you couldn't see. The kind of changes that happen when no one is looking. Eventually, your grandfather told you the story. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming ghosts. no curses, just a place. Before the terraces, before the trails, before even the rope bridges, there was a village here. Different people, different tongues, but still people. They carved their dead into the rock, not buried, nested, curled, seated upright, sometimes with red paint smeared on the forehead or ashes pressed into the chest. They weren't mourned, they were consulted. He said the cave is one of those old nests. You asked why no one ever visits. He said, because they set are still there. You asked if they were dangerous. He said, only if you listened too closely. You didn't instead ask more. That night, you dreamed of braids of hair, coiled in circles, of teeth stacked in woven baskets, of tiny polished stones that hummed when touched. In the dream, the burial cave was open, and something inside was watching, not with eyes, but with patience. The elders said, leave it alone. So you did. But one day, a stranger came, a traveler from the coast. He wore new sandals, silver rings, a cap too bright for these mountains. He offered your cousin dried fish in exchange for a shortcut through the upper fields. When you warned him about the cave, he laughed and said, stories are stories. He entered the field at sunrise. He didn't set, come back. Not that day, not the next. His pack was found near the ridge, untouched, but no footprints, no trail. Only a broken reed, placed neatly outside the cave mouth. You didn't report it. No one did. Just gathered the dried fish, blessed the soil with coca leaves, and moved the terrace stones a little closer together. Now, it sits part of the landscape again, hidden, but not gone. Sometimes, when the wind moves just right, you can hear something beneath the grass, a low breath, a memory not meant for you. And you walk a little faster, just enough to pretend you weren't afraid, just enough to pretend it never called your name. You rise before the sun. The stars haven't blinked out yet, and the mountains still wear their crowns of frost, but already the village is stirring in its own quiet way, bare feet thudding softly on packed earth, pots being carried without conversation, a distant cough from someone too old to be moving this early, but doing it anyway. It is the day before the harvest, and in these mountains, that means it's time to speak to the apis. You've done this every year since you were tall enough to reach the altar stone without help, but still, it makes your stomach twist, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of it, the weight of asking. You chew coca leaves before anything else, not for the energy, not for the ritual buzz behind your eyes, but because it's part of the language. You don't speak to the mountains with words. You speak with breath, with rhythm, and with the scent of coca on your tongue. The leaves are bitter. They tingle in your jaw. You pack them tight in your cheek and begin the climb. It's not far, this altar, just beyond the terraces, up a winding trail carved by footsteps older than your grandmother's bones. The path is narrow but worn smooth, like a crease in the world where every generation has folded itself into prayer. The stone waits at the top. It's not big. It's not carved into a jaguar or a serpent or a bird. It doesn't glow. It doesn't sing. It just sits there, squat, pitted, streaked with moss. The only sign that it's not just another rock is the way it feels when you touch it. Like heat, even in the morning cold. Like the mountain is leaning closer to listen. You kneel, not in reverence. Exactly. This isn't worship the way coastal people might think of it. It's more like negotiation. You press your forehead to the stone. You feel the grit against your skin, the cold seeping into your nose, and you begin. The chant is older than language. Not even your mother can explain what it means, only how to say it. A string of sounds that vibrate through your jaw, bouncing between your skull and the stone like echoes in a bone cave. It sets not the words that matter. It sets the breath. You breathe into the mountain. You feed it. One steady exhale at a time, with coca-tinted saliva dripping down your chin. You name the crops, one by one, not out loud, but in your head. The potatoes, the maize, the okay, the beans. You imagine each one as a child you are trying to protect. You promise to share. You promise not to hoard. You promise not to waste. And in return, you ask quietly, through clenched teeth, that the mountain keeps the hail away, that it holds the frost a little longer, that it lets the sun arrive, but not too hard, not too fast. You ask for balance, because balance is everything here, between cold and warmth, between hunger and fullness, between rock and root. Some years the mountain listens. Some years it doesn't stet, but you ask anyway. When the chant ends, you lean back and spit the chewed coca leaves onto the ground beside the stone. Not on it. Never on it. That would be an insult. You press your thumb into the damp earth, then onto your forehead, marking yourself with the mountain's breath. You dawn set feel different. But that bit's the point. This isn't about transformation. It's about continuity. About reminding the soil who you are, and reminding yourself where you stand. You descend the trail slowly. The village is more awake now. Children carrying baskets, old women muttering over clay pots, a few men sharpening sickles made from stone and bone and patience. No one asks what you said at the altar. They already know. Later that night, the firelight will flicker off your skin. You'll sit cross-legged in your family's stone hut, sipping hot broth made from whatever was left over last week. You'll feel the ache in your knees from kneeling too long. And when the wind rattles the thatch above your head, you'll wonder if the mountain is breathing too. Not watching, not judging, just listening, always listening. Not smoke, not fire, not even food, just stone, wet, warm, worn down by years of grinding. It clings to your hands before you've even opened your eyes. It coats your tongue before your first bite. It lives in the air of your kitchen, in the calluses on your palms, in the rhythm of your back as you lean, press, and grind. Because in this village, before there is breakfast, there is labor. And before there is corn, there is the baton. The baton is your kitchen's heart, a slab of flat volcanic rock with a curve just deep enough to cradle crushed kernels. It doesn't look like much, not to an outsider, but to you it is as sacred as the altar stone on the hill, because it feeds you, because it remembers you, because it bears the mark of your family's hands, generations of elbows and wrists and tired shoulders pressing corn into something edible. You begin with the soaking. Maize from last year's harvest, left overnight in a clay jar, softened by ash water until its skin wrinkles like old fingers. You pour it out, let the water splash across your toes and scoop the kernels into a woven bowl. Then, you kneel, always kneeling. This is not a task for the standing. You place a handful on the baton. You take the uña, a curved grinding stone, smooth as river glass, shaped like the heel of a giant's palm, and begin to move it in slow, rocking strokes. Back and forth, back and forth. The kernels don't give in easily. They push back, they scatter, but you press harder, leaning your weight into it, letting the rhythm take over. Your arms know what to do. Your shoulders remember the way. The kitchen around you is not quiet, but it is peaceful. Children argue over whose turn it is to fetch water. A dog scratches at the lintel. Someone outside coughs, spits, and curses the cold. A clay pot clinks on the fire pit. You grind, back and forth. When the paste is ready, you scoop it into your hand. sticky yellow flecked with shell. It smells faintly sweet, but mostly like dust. You spread it thin onto a clay tanta, a round griddle blackened from years of fire and smoke, and place it over the embers. The smell changes instantly, from raw to roasted, from dull to waking. Corn has many lives here. It is a tortilla, a dumpling, a thick drink, a powder that makes everything else last longer. But today it is a flatbread, crackling at the edges, bubbling in the middle, waiting to be scraped off with the edge of a stone spoon and eaten hot enough to burn your fingers. But not alone. Nothing is eaten alone. There are spicy potatoes, their skins blistered from pit baking, yellow ones, purple ones, tiny bitter ones that you only eat when you have to, peeled with your teeth, mashed with your thumb. And there is llama broth, dark, rich, steeped with wild herbs that grow between the rocks. The meat is tough, almost dry, but it gives the broth its depth, a hint of smoke, a memory of salt, a little protein to keep the wind from carrying you away. The broth bubbles in a black pot, its lid a flat stone weighted with another smaller one. You don't measure time by minutes here. You measure it by scent, by when the steam changes, by when the clay starts to sweat, by when your stomach tightens in anticipation. When it's ready, you ladle it into a hollowed gourd. You press a tortilla against the rim, soaking up the edges. You don't need a table. You don't need a chair. You eat crouched, cupping the bowl in both hands, letting the steam bathe your face. The salt clings to your lips. The spice makes your nose run. But you don't stop. Because food isn't leisure here. It's continuity. It's proof that something went right, that the weather held, that the harvest came, that the baton didn't crack. And later, after the sun has moved higher and the shadows of the bridges have shrunk to threads, you'll return to the kitchen to do it all again, because someone is always hungry, because work is always waiting, because corn does not grind itself, and no one here is ever done chewing the stone. You feel it before you see it, seeping in through the edges of the stone walls, slipping beneath the woven doormat, brushing across the back of your neck like an unwelcome whisper. It smells like dust, old sweat, and distant snow. And that means one thing. It's time to layer up. Your clothes are not clothes. Exactly. Not the way someone from the future might think. There are no buttons, no stitched seams, no fabric bought from someone you'll never meet. Everything you wear was spun by hands you know, woven on backstrap looms, dyed in pots that still smell faintly of fire and salt, softened by smoke and time. You reach for your tunic, unku, they call it, a simple rectangle with a slit for the head, worn like a second skin. It's made of alpaca wool, thick but breathable, with a roughness that's become familiar. Comforting, even, like the scratchy wool is a reminder that you're still here, that the wind hasn't taken you yet. The color is deep red, dyed with cochineal, a pigment made from crushed insects that live on cactus pads. It takes hundreds of them for a single batch of dye. You've watched your aunt gather them before, pinching them gently, drying them, grinding them into powder that stains everything it touches. You pull the tunic over your head and feel the static cling of the wool against your skin. It's itchy, yes, but you've stopped noticing, like you've stopped noticing the smoke in your hair and the dirt under your fingernails. These are just parts of your daily costume. Then comes the sash, thick, multicolored, woven so tightly it could probably hold up a bridge if it had to. You wrap it twice around your waist. It keeps the tunic in place, yes, but it also stores what little you carry. A carved bone needle, a few coca leaves, a thread of good luck knotted by your grandmother when you were still too small to walk. For your feet, if you're lucky, ushutas, Sandals made from braided llama hide. The soles are stiff. The straps chafe, but they keep you from slipping on the moss-covered stones. Sometimes, other times, you go barefoot. Because it's faster. Because you know the trails by heart. Because sandals don't grow on trees. Now that you're dressed, you step outside for a moment. The village is turning quiet. Not silent, never silent, but quiet in that way. Mountains do so well. The kind of hush that hums. Someone is tying up a bundle of reeds. Someone else is blowing into a flute carved from bone. A dog yawns and turns 3 times before curling up against a wall still warm from the sun. You pull the tunic tighter around your shoulders. And then, when the last bit of light is slipping off the terraces and the smell of burnt chilis has faded from the air, you duck into your hut. Your house is made of stone. Not cut stone, not elegant or royal or even symmetrical, just what you could carry. Dry, stacked by hand, held together with time and stubbornness. The roof is thatched straw and twigs layered into a dome that creaks with every gust of wind. Inside, it is dark. One opening for light, one pit for fire, one shelf carved into the wall for holding bowls, charms, and dried herbs you only use when someone coughs too hard or forgets how to walk straight. You sleep on a raised platform, wood if you're lucky, stone if you're not, with llama skins spread out in layers. They smell like the animal. Of course, a little sharp, a little sour, but also like safety, warmth, something you can hold on to while the night tries to steal your heat. You lie down, pulling another wool blanket over your body. Its zest heavy, like a promise not to drift too far. The wind breathes through the cracks in the stone, but the hut breathes too, expanding with heat, contracting with cold. It is alive in its own way, bent, weathered, worn smooth like your hands. You close your eyes, listening to the familiar sounds, wood settling, embers sighing, a cough from the next hut over. And above it all, the faint whisper of wind sliding across the thatch, playing the house like a flute. There are no blackboards in your village, no desks, no pens, no dusty books stacked in rows, no bell ringing to start the day, and no long speeches about empires or stars or the proper way to divide numbers. But still, you learn. You learn by watching, by copying, by failing quietly, and fixing it before anyone notices. You learn by doing. And what you learn is made of string. The quipu is your alphabet, and your notebook, and your ledger, and your story. It's not just knots, it's knowledge, wrapped around fibers, memory woven into cord. The first time you see one up close, you're barely old enough to sit still. It hangs from a wooden peg, long and shaggy, like a beard made of rain. Thick cords, thin ones, hanging in layers. Some are dyed red, some yellow, others are still the natural brown of undyed llama hair. You reach for it once, and your grandmother slaps your hand away, not harshly, but firmly, because this is not a toy. This is history. This is how your people remember. Later, when she allows you to help, it starts with spinning. You hold a wad of fleece in your hand, pulling gently while you twist it into a single thread. The spindle whirls on the floor beside you, bumping softly every few seconds against your ankle. The motion is hypnotic, steady, repetitive, slow. You could do it with your eyes closed. You probably will. When the thread is strong enough, you tie it to others. Wrap it around, loop it through. The knots are tiny, some barely larger than a bean, others the size of your fingernail, but each one has meaning. One knot means 3, another means 30, another means 3,000. But not just because of the number of loops, because of the placement, the distance, the color of the string, the type of fiber. It's math. Yes, but it's also poetry. And the best part, no one outside your people really understands it. They've tried. Outsiders have stared at quippus, like they're riddles, like they're codes waiting to be cracked. But what they don't see, what they can't see, is that you don't just read a quippus. You feel it. Each knot has tension, resistance. You tug on it gently, and it tugs back. It has memory. It knows who tied it. It carries the smell of their hands, the weight of their thoughts. You learn that a quipu can carry a census, or a song, or a warning. One quipu might tell you how many jars of grain were stored after the last harvest. Another might record the names of the runners who carried messages from Cusco to the coast. Another still might be a prayer, meant only for the eyes of the mountain gods. When your fingers get more skilled, you graduate to Kipu Kamayuk work. That's what the record keepers are called, the knot readers. They're not just clerks, they're trusted, feared even, because they remember what others forget. You work beside one now, an old man with no teeth and a spine shaped like a gnarled root. He never raises his voice, but somehow everyone listens. When he ties, he does it in silence. When he speaks, it's only to correct the tiniest slip of a knot, the most invisible miscount. You study his fingers, like a student studies scripture. Left over right, double loop, tension, release. He shows you how to distinguish between a simple accounting chord and a narrative one. How to feel the difference between llama and alpaca wool in the dark. How to sense when a knot was tied too quickly, because it never lies flat. There's no ceremony to this kind of learning, no final test. One day you're just expected to know. And when someone hands you a half-finished strand and says, "You finish it," you do. Not because you're ready, but because waiting to feel ready is a luxury no one here can afford. Eventually, you begin to make your own quippus, not for records, but for memory. You tie one for the time your brother fell into the ravine and came back with a new respect for ropes. You tie another for the first time you crossed the longest bridge without crying. Another still when your mother sang to the condors and they circled low overhead, almost close enough to touch. And in this way, your life becomes a tapestry of knots, each one holding a piece of you. Not just what happened, but how it felt. No ink, no paper, no alphabet, just thread and silence, and the slow wisdom of fingers that never stop moving. You've heard his name spoken like a prayer, whispered over coca leaves carved into stones. They say he speaks to Inti, the sun god, face to face, that he carries the divine heat of the sun in his veins, that when he steps onto a golden platform, even the clouds make room for his shadow. But that Sep's far from here. He lives in Cusco, in palaces gilded with plates of hammered gold, where the walls echo with flutes and feathered dancers glide across courtyards. He rides in a litter so heavy with jewels it takes dozens of men to carry him, and still he floats like wind across the stones. You live in a village where the stones sink deeper every year. No golden walls, no platforms, just the cold breath of the mountains and the weight of woven bridges swinging between cliffs. You know that the emperor is sacred, but sacred doesn't mean helpful when the rope bridge frays or the maize dries before harvest. Here in this suspended place, the one who holds power isn't the man who claims to speak with the sun. It's the old woman in the hut at the edge of the terrace, the weaver. She never raises her voice. She never asks for anything twice. Her hut smells like dust and wool and warm cornmeal. And though she's no taller than your chest and her hands tremble slightly with age, everyone bends their head when they enter her doorway. Not because she commands it, because it feels wrong not to. She doesn't wear gold, Her tunic is plain, stained from dyework and hours by the fire, but she wears a belt you've never seen removed, braided from threads of all the villages she's lived in. She says it's how she keeps the world wrapped together. Children fear her in the way they fear lightning. Beautiful, unpredictable, impossible to explain. She sits not your ruler. She sits your reminder. When a young man dares to cross the ravine before his first hair-cutting ceremony, she sips the one who says, "Let the rope teach him." When someone sips potato harvest fails, and they try to hide it from the communal storehouse, she says, "Empty hands speak loudest." She never shouts, but her voice stays in your head for days. She is the one who chooses who braids the bridge ropes each year, who assigns the positions at the harvest feast, who remembers whose grandmother once saved the village goat herd during a snowstorm, and who only pretended to. People say the Sapa Inca is descended from the sun, but here, the weaver knows every shadow. She was once a Kipukamayuk, back when her fingers were steadier than the mountain wind. Now her knots are mostly for ceremony, for memory, for guiding the dead on their journey beyond the snow peaks. You watch her during these rituals, the way she lays each strand across her lap, the way her eyes go distant, as though she's listening to something very far away, some chord that stretches all the way back to before the first terrace was carved, before the first bridge was hung. Once, during a fire ceremony, she lets you place your fingers over hers just once. The strands feel alive. She doesn't sit to explain what they mean. She just nods and says, "If you can sit, feel it. Don't sit, fake it." Later, after she's gone, no one replaces her. Not truly. A younger woman sits in her place. She braids well. She remembers names. But the wind doesn't pause when she speaks. The dogs don't lie still outside her door. The plants don't seem to lean toward her voice. Power here isn't declared. It isn't crowned. It's remembered. In gold cities far away, empires rise and fall with each new emperor. Here, you know better. Empires are rope bridges, woven by many hands, trusted without question, walked with trembling steps. And sometimes, the only thing holding it all together is the oldest thread. Sunset isn't a gentle dimming. It's a cliffside curtain fall. One moment, golden rays glide across the terraces. The next, shadows swallow them whole, and the chill wraps itself around your ankles like an old cat begging for attention. There's no bedtime bell, no lights out policy, just the slow rhythm of the village folding itself inward. You begin your descent from the upper terrace by feel, not sight. Your feet know where to land. Your fingertips brush the woven railing. You follow the faint orange glow that dances beyond the cooking huts. Tonight Tibb's fire pit is already lit. It crackles quietly, feeding on dry kindling and twisted root ends. A few older men sit nearby, shells of potatoes resting in their palms. One of them hums a tune with no melody, just the rise and fall of memory stretched into sound. You sit cross-legged, on a woven mat, still warm from the day's sun, though it cools rapidly beneath your thighs. You're wrapped in layers, 2 tunics, a shawl, a llama hide cap that smells like rain, but still, the cold fingers your collarbone, still, the breath curls white into the dark. A woman across from you plays the antera, a panpipe carved from cane, not a song. Not really, just a few gentle notes, carried off immediately by the wind, as though the air itself had been waiting to hear them and couldn't bear to hold them long. The fire spits softly. Someone adds a handful of dry herbs. The scent rises, bitter, minty, sharp like crushed eucalyptus. It mixes with the smell of charred corn husks and the faint, earthy ghost of clay smoke. No one speaks for a long while. And then, softly, someone murmurs a tale. It doesn't matter which one. It's always the same, really. A mountain that moved, a man who turned to stone, a spirit that braided the clouds. The stories all sound like wind wearing different masks. You lean your head back and let the stars blur. High above, the Milky Way spills like a split sack of grain. You were taught that it's a river, the celestial twin of the sacred streams below. A place where ancestors row their boats made of starlight, navigating between worlds. The fire dims slowly. The embers deepen from gold to red to a quiet, barely breathing pulse. Someone yawns. Another stands, stretches, cracks their knees. There's no ceremony for sleep, just a slow unraveling. You shuffle into your family's hut. The door is a cloth flap, nothing more. The floor is dirt, cool and soft. You lay down close to your siblings, sharing warmth like dogs in winter. Your bed is a thin mat over a packed earth floor, topped with an alpaca wool blanket. It scratches a little. It smells like sheep and smoke, but it holds in the heat, and it carries the weight of familiarity. The wind plays against the hut's stone walls like a musician tapping reed flutes. A dog outside whines once, then curls into silence. Somewhere, a baby fusses. Somewhere else, someone mutters in sleep. And the condors, those silent gods of the sky, drift overhead, invisible in the dark, their wings slicing moonlight with ancient grace. You close your eyes. You can still feel the rope bridge beneath your feet. You can still smell the roasted tubers on your fingers. You can still hear the weaver's voice, the Antera's breath, the quiet crunch of footsteps on gravel. There is no clock here, no buzzing street lamp, no midnight alerts. Only the hush, the fire's last sigh, the condor's drift, and the sense that sleep, like the rest of your day, is something woven slowly, carefully, between the stones and sky. Beyond the legends, life in an Inca rope bridge village.